Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi tayyibin at-tahirin. Thank you very much for those who are tuning in live right now in our ongoing series of trying to educate the community about its rights as well as its responsibilities. I'm your needy brother Dawud, Executive Director of the Michigan Chapter of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And this evening's topic will be about students knowing their rights in schools, and probably public schools to be more exact. How do students deal with issues such as having religious accommodations, being able to, pray in school, be able to observe religious holidays and get off with absences, excuse how that looks. Other accommodations in terms of religious accommodations attire, also addressing the issues of bullying, in which bullying takes place in our schools throughout the state of Michigan, not just bullying from students or fellow students, but also bullying from faculty. So we will discuss with you about that and how to report that. After these presentations by my two capable colleagues, we will then avail ourselves for questions and answers. But without any further ado, I'm going to bring up Sister Amy, who is our staff attorney at CAIR Michigan, and also our new person to our CAIR Michigan team. This is her first discussion publicly as a CAIR staffer, our new Director of Safe Spaces, Sister Nour. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Alhamdulillah. So I'm going to take myself off of the screen so you ladies can give your parts of the presentation, and I will be back on at the conclusion, God willing.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us today. This is a very important topic for our youth. This is an informational seminar about understanding your rights, as Brother Dawud said, within the framework of the public school system. So what we'll discuss today is what are our rights, where do our rights come from, and then what the schools have to do in order to protect our rights. So this is intended to be informational only and does not create an attorney-client relationship between CAIR Michigan and any of the viewers. And if you have a very specific incident that happened to you or someone that you know of that you'd like to talk about at the end, we'll ask you to hold that and see if you can call our office and discuss that as well. I think I'm going to first talk a little bit about where do our religious rights come from. So many of you know, you've been taught in school, if you're in high school or college, about the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights protects our religious freedoms from infringement by the government, and the government includes the public school system. So we have the First Amendment of the Constitution that protects our rights against infringement from our rights, and it also protects our rights from being from the school trying to impose other religious rights on us. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution are really what we call the Bill of Rights, and that's where our rights comes from. And one of the really great things about our Constitution and the Bill of Rights in our Constitution is that it protects not only the citizens of the United States, but it uses the term persons. So it protects all persons in the United States. And that means it protects you regardless of what your status is here, whether you're here on a visitor visa, or you're here on a visa for work or school, or even if you're an undocumented immigrant to the United States, somebody who is here without any legal status in the United States, our constitutional still protects your rights. So when we talk about the First Amendment, I kind of like to joke around a little bit, and I say the First Amendment was placed first because it's the most important rights. And those are really the rights that we're going to talk about today. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. And what that really means is when you go to public schools, your public school officials and administrators and teachers should not be talking to you about religion. They should not be, this is where we talk about there's no prayer in school, there is no proselytizing or trying to convert people in school. The government cannot use its money to further religion. But it also the second clause says that you have the right to freely exercise your religion. And exercising our religion is really what we're concerned about when we're talking about our rights in public school. And then the third clause we're going to talk about is really about your right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech within the public school system, and what does that look like? So what do we mean about freedom of religion? What can we do and what can't we do at school? Public schools, including your public universities, are considered basically arms of the government, right? So they're considered to be part of the government entities. They're paid for by tax dollars. They're run by public entities. School boards are voted in as part of our democratic process. So they really are governmental entities. So you really have a lot of protections when it comes to your rights in public school. So some of the things that are protected in the public school setting as it relates to your religious rights. What about prayer in school? So we know that teachers can't lead prayer in school, but what about students? Can students have prayer in school? Absolutely. Students have an absolute right to pray while they are in public school. And this goes for students of any age. We're talking elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids, college age, young adult students. All have the right to pray. The school has the obligation to provide you with a quiet and safe space to pray, and they have an obligation to provide you with the time that you need to pray. If that requires, allowing you 10-minute break in between classes or allowing you to leave class during the time of prayer, it absolutely means that you have the right to pray. And this includes Juma. I gave a presentation yesterday where a lot of parents were surprised to realize that children have the right to have a Juma. Those children who are of the age of majority, and Juma is an obligation for them, they have a right to pray Juma in school. So they have a right to an accommodation to either be able to leave school for the purposes of congregational prayer on Fridays. Students are still responsible for all of the work that they're being assigned during those periods of times. We have the right to leave and come back. Or a lot of schools in this area will actually hold a Juma prayer for students. They will allow students to organize their own prayer and bring in religious scholars to lead those, oftentimes like right at the end of the school day. But absolutely, you have the absolute right as a public school student to have prayer in the school. And there has been a lot of litigation around this, and not just in the frame of like Muslims, right? We're talking about Christians who leave schools, Jewish individuals who leave schools to pray. So this is a well-settled area of law. What about religious clubs for students? Absolutely. The First Amendment's right for religious freedom and their right to assemble protects the rights of religious clubs in school. So what that means is that if the school has other school, like secular school clubs or other religious school clubs in general, the Muslims have a right to have an MSA, a Muslim student organization, and they have the same rights. So if the schools are providing funding for activities for those clubs, then the Muslim organizations must be provided the same access to those types of funds for their activities. And in addition to that, we know that a lot of schools in the area maybe don't have Islamic teachers. So what happens when we have a teacher in school? Like, we don't have a teacher to lead the MSA. Even if a teacher you don't have a Muslim teacher to lead the MSA, and there's always a requirement that the teachers are oversee, or they provide resources to and guidance to the student organization so that they are acting within the school guidelines. They still have to assign somebody as your teacher assistant to the program. There is a requirement that schools can compel a person to do certain things, even if it's not necessarily within their own religious guidelines. So they have to provide you with the necessary tools to be able to exercise that. Now, so what can you do as an MSA? So as an MSA, there are 3 conditions that have to be met. So the activity that you're looking to do must take place outside of school hours, just like every other club. The school officials cannot run the clubs, the MSAs. And this is something that we ran into. We ran into a university that opened up an MSA on their own, and they had administrators, even non-Muslim administrators, running the MSA. That is an inappropriate and illegal activity because that means the school is intertwining itself unnecessarily with religion, which is a violation of the Establishment Clause. So this really is supposed to be a student-led initiative. And the school must make its facilities available to you on an equal basis. So what about passing out materials? Can the MSA pass out materials? Yes and no. So you can pass out materials and religious materials on school grounds as long as you're doing it as long as you are the ones that are passing out the materials and you are the ones that are doing it after school and during meetings and not being disruptive to the overall school environment. So if you have some materials you want to pass out and you're an MSA and you're trying to provide informational about what, like maybe Dawud information about what it looks like to be Muslim, or, to get to know your fellow students better, make sure that you just understand the procedures at school for passing out that information, but you absolutely have the right to pass out that information at school. So what about religious holidays? We know a lot of times going to school, I know my kids did, they kind of felt that their holidays are overlooked, right? So we have all of the major Christian holidays off school. It's built right into the school calendars, Christmas, Easter, all of those things. But sometimes it's difficult to have Eid off for holidays in the schools. There are several school districts recently, including Detroit Public Schools, Washtenaw International High School, and some others that have built in the Eid holidays in their school. And that's within their calendar. And they allow the Eid to be taken off. But what happens if your school doesn't do that? Especially, we know sometimes this last year, Eid fell right in the middle of exam week for a lot of high schools. But we're entitled to have our religious holidays off, and we're entitled to take those days off without any consequences. We have to provide notice to the schools that we need these days off, and they have to make a reasonable accommodation for us to obtain the materials that we need. It's an excused absence, so it cannot be used against you for grading purposes. And they have to be, if there's an exam or something that falls on that day, they have to make a reasonable accommodation to allow you to take those exams or make up the work that's being done. What about religious displays? So sometimes we know that schools try to be inclusive. So they do allow religious displays that are created by the students that sort of explain religious holidays. So if that type of activities taking place at your school, then you should absolutely try to enforce your rights or try to ask and provide that same type of display or information to your peers by creating the same type of school display. It has to be created by the students, it has to be maintained by the students, and it has to be something that's done in the normal course of business. So they have to allow you to talk about it. They have to allow you to make up your work, and they cannot penalize you for engaging in your own religious activities. What about food services in school? This doesn't really pertain a lot to colleges and universities where lunches are not provided, but a lot of public elementary, middle schools, and high schools, they have a hot lunch program. Most of them in around the country no longer offer pork, and they no longer have this mixing of the pork and the non-pork products. But Muslim students are entitled to have food that they can eat, and if there is a hot lunch program, it's overseen by the federal government. It's required to meet nutrition guidelines, and if you are a recipient of hot lunch, you have the right to have the same proper calories and nutrition as everybody else. So you have to work with your school to make sure that they have non-pork, non-meat options if they're not offering halal, and that they meet your dietary restrictions. So there has to be options available for people who have dietary restrictions based on their religious belief, especially when we're talking about areas of school where maybe everybody is getting free or reduced lunch. They have to accommodate our dietary restrictions, just like they would somebody who, say, had a nut allergy or some other type of food intolerance. Depending on the makeup of the school, we have some schools in this area that have a very high makeup of Muslim children. And there are cases in which those schools have been able to obtain halal meat. If you're in a school that has a high concentration of Muslims that are buying hot lunch or entitled to hot lunch every day, having halal meat might be an option for you. And it's something that you definitely could advocate for. And if you need assistance with that, that's something that CAIR Michigan can assist you with, because they should be providing halal meat based on the dietary needs of the Muslims. Sometimes it's cost prohibitive if you only have 1 or 2 Muslim students in the entire school district to bring that meat in, which is why they have to provide other options for you. And due to the nature of the college environment, this might not be something that's reasonable. Bringing in like a halal meal service would be something that you'd have to actively engage with the administration in, because most of the colleges have they have like a food court, which is all run by private businesses. So they're not providing the actual food, that they're most likely alleviated from this. So if you'd like to have halal meat on campus, this is something that you could approach local businesses about and see if they'd be willing to open up in the food court, and if there's an opportunity to do that for them. However, if you are attending an event at the university that's sponsored maybe by the biology department or the math department, then we should be, advocating for ourselves to have those religious meal accommodations that we need, and not just necessarily engaging in, picking through the food to determine what we can eat. So what about freedom of speech? And I wanted to talk about freedom of speech as it relates to school kids, because it's a very important issue, and it's sort of outside the scope of our religious rights, but it's sort of within the framework of what we hold dear as speaking out against oppression. And because this has been an issue that we've been facing at CAIR Michigan over the last couple of years, where we've seen primarily high school students getting into trouble for engaging in free speech type activities at their high school, or, when we were virtual, putting up a screen of perhaps maybe the Palestinian flag or some other social justice initiative that we're engaged with. And we've seen administrations, especially as it comes to Palestine, which is a very hot topic, and it's very controversial in some areas. We've seen people who have faced severe backlash by the schools when they're in high school. But I'm here to tell you that should not be the case. You have an absolute right to engage in free speech activities, including demonstrations at your school, so long as you're not disrupting the educational environment for anybody else. So long as you're not doing anything that would be considered to be obscene or call for violence, you are really, there's a lot of leeway with free speech. So we're talking if you're making signs that you're hanging in your own locker, or in places where you're allowed to hang them in school. Some schools have a rock. If you're painting the rock with social justice movements, if you're wearing T-shirts, if you're wearing paraphernalia or emblems, as long as you're not violating dress code issues, and even as far as creating displays or organizing protests. And this is especially true when we're talking about college campuses. High school and college campuses, the street corner, the sidewalk, those are all considered to be quote unquote public forums, like the soapbox where people would stand and they would, it's supposed to be a place of free thinking and free thought and exchange of ideas. So it's typically held to a very high standard. So if you're engaging in free speech activities on campus, including at your high school especially, or your college, and you're being punished for that, that isn't something that is completely inappropriate and completely illegal. So and free speech is protected. So, and I also, the part of the presentation I gave yesterday was really about the rights of children. Really, what are the rights of children? And there's a lot of law out there that states that children hold all of their same rights as adults do, except for the right to vote, because that one was enumerated specifically for people over 18 in the Constitution. But children's sincerely held religious beliefs, even at the age of 7, have been upheld in the court system. the rights that are afforded to adults are all afforded to all of the children. You have exactly the same rights, and you have the right to enforce your rights in any the same manner. The only time that becomes problematic for minors is if they are causing a active disruption to the learning environment in the school. Other than that, if you're not disrupting the educational environment, and you're engaging in protected speech, meaning it's not hate speech, it's not threats, and it's not like basically shouting fire in a movie theater, everything else is protected, and you have an absolute right to engage in it, whether it's religious speech or political speech. So, just to recap, kind of what we went over, it's like some very brief overview of your rights, but you have religious rights in schools. You have the right to have your food accommodated. You have the right to gather and assemble and create a student organization that enhances your rights and provides you with educational and spiritual opportunities on campus. You have a right to prayer in school. You have a right to have your holidays off and be accommodated without penalty when you're taking your holidays off. And I know that this has been an issue for some of our constituents previously. So, but those are all of the things that you have an absolute right to do. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sister Nour, who welcome Sister Nour, so that she can kind of go over some more information with you about what it looks like to be Muslim on campus.
Sorry, assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Nour Ali. I am the new director of Safe Spaces here at CAIR Michigan. I'm very grateful to be working here, especially alongside Brother Dawud and Sister Amy. I feel very, lucky, special to know and work with these people. So part of what I want to go over is sort of what it looks like to actually speak out against these things. I wasn't a student that long ago, especially at U of M. And in my local high school, I grew up here in Dearborn Heights. I was a part of Crestwood Public Schools. I vividly remember speaking out against some of the books that were taught, which were like the only pieces of literature that pertained to Islam that honestly did not really do Islam any justice. For example, I know in the office we've talked about Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and then also The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. Those are two pieces of literature that are introduced to students typically in their AP Lang or AP Lit classes. Those are also taught at the college level too. And Sister Amy did a really great job in telling everybody that's tuning in that you do have a right to speak out about these things. However, what does that look like? And for me, anytime that I had spoken out against it, there was retaliation. That retaliation came in the form of markdowns of grades, which is obviously a very big problem. And actually, for a very long time, I thought it was the only one that was really going through this in terms of teachers reacting to me in that way. However, ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, they actually did a study that about 1 in 4 Muslim students that are bullied by teachers or administration. So this is more common than it should be. And so Sister Amy, I just want to know, if a student feels that they have been treated poorly as a result of speaking out, what steps can they do from there?
Sure, Nour, that's actually a very good question, and you're not the only one, and it has happened, and we've had people come to us. So if you believe that you're being retaliated against for speaking out, well, first of all, let me say that you should never be put in a position where you have to defend yourself or your religion or your belief system or your practices in a public forum like that, which is why we encourage colleges and public schools not to use those types of inflammatory books that maybe have a one-sided, lopsided view of Islam or the culture of people who practice Islam. Because it's not fair. But if you do feel like you've spoken out and you're not getting treated fairly because of that, the first thing you should do is you should notify administration at your school that this has taken place. You should ask for a grade review. And there are, different types of complaints you can file. You can call CAIR-Michigan and we can walk you through the steps of what that looks like. There are Department of Education complaints that can be filed with regards to discrimination in grading as a result of retaliation for religious protected activities such as protected speech. So those are, you have to assert your rights, because if we're not asserting and people sometimes are scared to do that, right? But if we're not asserting our rights, we're losing our rights. And the more rights we give up, the harder it will be in the end to, be complete full members of society, because we've abdicated our rights to make everybody else comfortable. And that's a problem that we're facing right now, honestly.
Yeah. And I've also seen that too, where students, I've gone through it as well, where you almost feel like it's a shameful thing to be a Muslim and that you just shouldn't even talk about it at all. I was always an undergrad very hesitant to share with professors that I was fasting for Ramadan, or even if I were to have to leave class to go to prayer and then quietly come back. However, especially at institutions like U of M, MSU, Wayne State, there are typically large Jewish populations as well that have made accommodations for the high holidays, such as Yom Kippur, where they also engage in fasting. And I know sometimes professors won't even distribute an exam if it falls after Sabbath. So Muslims, we shouldn't feel as if we're imposing anything on people. Many Muslims, such as myself, who grew up in this post 9/11 America, kind of feel constantly bad at all times, but that is definitely not the case. I was even looking through today, Sister Amy, about some of the religious, different religious rites in the correctional facilities. And I was amazed to see that they allow something for Odinism, Norse mythology. So I just want everybody listening in to know that if very small religious groups can have access to these things and have access to their rights, we can as well. And I also want to,
Bismillah, go ahead.
I also want to mention for hijabi women, as a hijabi myself, I know how difficult it can be to navigate sometimes school settings where you feel almost forced to engage in mixed gender settings. I think what's also really important for us, again, do not hold this shame, do not internalize the shame of being Muslim. The best thing that I ever did was communicate with my teachers or professors at the beginning of every semester and basically outlined boundaries. I let them know that I'm sure you all remember in K through 12, you have these little desks that are really close knit together. And, just outline that you would prefer to sit next to another girl, and, just let them know that you don't want to be put in that position if you're not comfortable.
Yeah, thank you both for comments. I'm gonna, as we're waiting for questions to come, if there are any, I'm just gonna jump, or as what the phrase is, just cut through the chase, and I'm gonna bring up something that's probably the most politically incorrect thing to mention, as it relates to bullying or feeling compelled against one's free will, and this is the issue as it relates to, and there's a question, I'll read it. But after this comment, and this relates to not just student bullying, but faculty bullying. And bullying can take place not just with information that is said incorrectly about Islam or about books such as Persepolis that give Orientalist frameworks, but there's also bullying that takes place in which Muslim students feel compelled to affirm beliefs or identities that go against their sincerely held First Amendment protected beliefs, right? And of one of these issues, and I know that Sister Amy mentioned the issue about Palestine, right, which is a hot button issue, and people feeling compelled as if they need to say certain things or take certain stances in regards to the occupying government of the Palestinian people. But also this comes into the issue of sexuality and gender, right? Where there are certain activities and Muslim students are made to feel that if they aren't actively involved in affirming certain identities or sex or be they sexual or gender, that then they are made to feel marginalized within class settings. Their school clubs are made to feel marginalized or being labeled as if their sincerely held beliefs are somehow phobic, and to be more specific, transphobic or homophobic, right? If this happens in the classroom, uh, to Muslim students and parents are watching, we suggest that you contact us immediately because we've had to deal with this issue of students being made to feel this way. And let me also say this, that don't feel shy about this, that there's this term that's really big right now and popular. It's called diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Well, if we're talking about true diversity, equity, and inclusion, no group's inclusion can be to our exclusion. In other words, for a group to be included, this cannot be to the exclusion of our religious identity and our religious belief. To promote something else is actually un-American and is something that we are willing to defend through um, mediation and even litigation if possible. The second thing is, and this has happened in PSEP schools last year, and actually our office is in Canton, right, where the issue of bathrooms and even areas in which people would change into attire in which people are allowed to self-select gender to go in these areas. And we know that for Muslims in our sincerely held religious beliefs, at least for Muslims who follow normative Islam and those who follow unorthodox interpretations, that's on them. But we're talking about for those who hold the sincerely held belief that certain parts of the body cannot be shown to the opposite gender by birth, biological, that Muslim children in schools have the right to assert that and not to be not to be compelled that they have to go and change clothes in front of someone who says that they're a female when in fact they're a male and they haven't even had any surgery. They have all of their male body parts, right? This is across the board. Islamic scholars, Shia and Sunnah, say this is unacceptable. The issue of Muslim women making wudu to go make prayer in schools, be it on lunch break or the Jummah prayer after school, and any person can walk in, where a sister's scarf is off or changing or whatever. I mean, irrespective of possible safety issues, right? No other group's exclusion about how they feel. No one's feelings can abrogate or override our First Amendment rights. And if any parents have this concern, we also are open for you to contact our office and let us know, because we are already contacting schools proactively to bring up this issue. But if need be, we are willing to explore legal options if proper accommodations are not made in schools for our children. And no intelligent group of people, and I'm saying this as a child of parents who are involved in civil rights movement, no intelligent people in the name of inclusion will give up their own civil rights and what's sacred to them in order to be accepted. So Muslims also need to get that out of their minds. Also, as CAIR Michigan, we are a nonpartisan organization. We are a 501c3. We are not tied to any political movement. We work with coalition partners. They're on the left, and also some of them may be on the right? But we don't have unconditional allegiance to one particular political persuasion that maybe aren't hostile to Muslims as an identity, but actually hostile to Islamic law and Islamic morality. because one political dispensation is more adverse to Muslims, looking at us more as a type of ethnic, racial, non-white group. That's to the far right. The far left is, okay, we accept you as people of color, as a minority group, but then they're hostile actually towards our fiqh and our akhlaq, or our ethics and our morality, right? So that's why we're at CAIR Michigan. We're funded by you. I have a saying, who funds you runs you. We're not ran by people on the outside. We're funded by your Sadaqah money and your Zakat money. And for these concerns, for the protection not only of your children, but for children to come, we can respectfully assert our rights. And it doesn't mean we hate anyone. It doesn't mean we hate people who are Zionists, who side with that particular government. We don't hate their humanity. We don't want anything bad to happen to them. And people who adhere to certain types of sexual norms or gender norms that we don't agree with, we don't hate them. We wish them the best and safety. But their program cannot override our First Amendment rights. And part of that also is freedom of speech. And you cannot be compelled. No one can compel your children in school to say anything. You can't be compelled to affirm any sort of sexuality or identity. You cannot be compelled for that. And we have to start being stronger as parents in teaching our children that it's not just having the freedom of speech of what to say, but also having the freedom of what not to say. Right? It goes both ways. Go ahead, Sister Amy, before I read this question. Go ahead.
Sure. So I just wanted to add on to that, and that's a very good point. So one of the things that I try to talk about when I talk about asserting your rights and what your rights are, you have the right not only to express your religious identity, but you have the right from other people trying to sort of silence your religious identity. You have the right to be free from having to publicly defend your religious identity. And some of the things that we've ran into in the last couple of years through CAIR Michigan is in the public school system, especially as it pertains to the high school education that our children are receiving, is they're put in a position where their teachers in this diversity background are promoting like homosexuality or the LGBTQ issues, and they're doing it in a way that puts Muslim children on the spot, where they're then left in a very public discussion in front of their peers to have to sort of define what their religious beliefs are and then defend them, when we've had teachers say, well, what you're saying is homophobic. And we've had teachers who've actually said, Muslims are homophobic as an entire identity, a religious identity, like our religious identity somehow is inherently homophobic in front of 14, 15, 16-year-old children. And that's unacceptable. And that is an unnecessary infringement. There's a power dynamic that is created by the teacher that puts Muslim students at a disadvantage. And this is something that we're trying to avoid. So if you're in a classroom where a teacher is demanding this type of conversation and you're not comfortable with it, you are free to not engage in that conversation. Like Brother Dawud said, you don't have to take a stance at all. You don't have to be the one saying, this is not how my religion is, or this is how my religion is. You don't have to. A very valid form of protest is silent protest, where we just abstain from engaging in that type of conversation because it is not your place to have to be compelled to do that. If you're comfortable to do that, you're comfortable to do that. But if as a student, if you're facing that, that's something you need to address with your parents right away. That's something that should be addressed with the school administration, and that's something that should definitely be brought to CAIR Michigan, because we've been able to go in and successfully navigate that. Sometimes it's not done out of malice. It's done out of like lack of knowledge of our religious beliefs and the best ways to assist us and accommodate us in the school setting. And we provide trainings to schools so that they can understand our position better and find a way to make the school environment safer for our children. And that's really all I wanted to add on to that.
Yes, and one other point, and Amy mentioned something very important, and we don't address these issues with schools with hostility. And most of the time, we believe that teachers are actually come from a a sincere place. But like one of my teachers told me, a sheikh, may Allah's mercy be upon his soul, he always told me, he said that you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. So just because we think someone comes from a good place and they don't have malice doesn't mean that the behavior from the faculty or the teachers is not in need of correction, right? So that's a very important point. We're not casting any judgment on, oh well, Miss such and such or Mr. such and such, they're really nice and they don't mean any harm. That's good. We actually believe that the vast majority don't mean harm, but they are harming people. They're harming students, and in those cases, we want to stop harm not just for that class, but to make it as a learning opportunity, so that they are really into inclusion and not excluding Muslims or Catholic kids or Orthodox Jewish kids or whoever, right? It's a true space that's not a hostile learning environment, right? And that's what really we're about as an organization.
I just want to add.
Go ahead.
I just want to add.
Then I'm gonna put a question up on the screen after that. Go ahead.
Of course, yeah. I just want to add that this all brings back to my original point that a teacher may try to retaliate against these students even if they don't talk, because typically engaging in discussion is a part of your overall grade. Typically, it's actually the largest portion of your grade in like any given class. So I want everybody listening in to know that that is why my position is here. Please feel free to call or email me and let me know if you feel as if your child or you as a student have been treated unjustly and your grade has gone down considerably because you did not engage in some of these discussions. I obviously also want to let everybody listening in know that I'm already reaching out to some schools, but there may be schools that we are unaware of where these are problems and issues that have come up. So please also contact our office and I can get in touch with that school. Again, such like Brother Dawud and Sister Amy said, it's never that it's malintent. Sometimes it is actually just ignorance and they are not aware of it posing an issue to Muslim students.
Very good. Thank you. So we have a question actually from an educator. This is wonderful. That's why we do these things. We even have people who are outside the Muslim community who tune in and seek to better serve Muslim students. I'm teaching a seminar at the university level and want to be inclusive of my Muslim students. How can I incorporate religious inclusivity into my syllabus beyond overarching discrimination policies?
I mean, I think that's a very good question, but I really think that's probably determined by the content of the class that you're teaching. There are a lot of different ways to incorporate, inclusivity of Muslims in the syllabus related to content that you're actually teaching. But ensuring that students are accommodated. If you have students, I know when I was in law school, I took evening classes. I had to pray Maghrib every day, and sometimes I had to fast. I was fasting during Ramadan, and it was class time. Ensuring that your policies are friendly for those types of activities if that's taking place in your class. Like if there's a no eating policy in your class, having an exception for when maybe Muslim students are fasting. And we have to break the fast in the evening, or if there's a prayer time, allowing a 5-minute break during class for Muslim students to pray. I think all of those things can be very, very accommodating to Muslims in the university setting, because that can be an issue. Muslims don't control the scheduling of classes, and sometimes we have to take a class because of, it fits the other time in our schedule, but maybe it conflicts with something that we're doing that's a religious obligation. And just building in those accommodations ahead of time are really good and a really good way to accommodate students.
Yeah, and let me also say this, because we've done both of these. So like this upcoming semester, there's two things. One, we've had discussions with individual professors one-on-one, where we set up times and talk through them individually to answer questions, and basically just do a one-on-one of stating certain things. We can arrange that. If you contact our office, we can arrange that with you, sir. Or we've also been brought in on a level beyond just syllabus incorporation, of being what we can say Muslim friendly or factoring in some of the religious needs of Muslim students, but we actually go into classes in person over Zoom and address various student bodies in classes or in seminars. And actually, we were just contacted today by a professor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, who specifically asked for me to come and speak to his class in October. We have something similar set up at Oakland University next month and other universities throughout the state. So that's something we are able to do that. So please contact our office, and we can have a one-on-one with Sister Nour. Perhaps we can go into your or go to your class even if need be, depending on what class or what the subject matter of the seminar.
I also think depending on the class that you're teaching, my initial thought is always to go back to the humanities because those were the courses that I took at U of M. So a lot of what I consumed was, literature. I think part of the religious inclusivity on that end is including Muslim voices that represent Islam in a nuanced way and not just a one-sided way. So some authors that I love to recommend. Obviously, some of these are just fiction, but one is like Fatima Farheen Mirza, her book, A Place for Us. When I first read it a few years ago, it really touched a chord in me because I felt like the American Muslim experience was finally shown. Also, certain like media that you show to your class. There are some TV shows and documentaries that don't do Islam any justice. I know Sister Amy and Brother Dawud might have an opinion on what I'm about to say, but Rami, the show on Hulu, it showed Islam in a way, American Islam in a way that many people my age grew up with. And I do think that despite some of the flaws that exist in Rami, he shows what it's like to be a Muslim and, struggling to maintain your faith while living in this society, rather than the typical like hijabi girl who hates wearing the hijab and takes it off and gets with like a random white guy. So we have
And that's, by the way, Sister Nour's personal taste. As she said, we don't at CAIR nationally. We don't endorse that show at all. We've actually criticized it. As I said,
yeah,
put that out there.
that's all we have right now for Muslims. Inshallah, more people are going to go into film and TV, and we'll have better representation.
Thank you. Any closing statements? Because I don't see any other questions. There's just that one university level student. And also, again, we did this before with Sister Nour's predecessor, Sayyidah Zainab Fahas, may Allah preserve her. But we actually have gone to youth in masajid and groups and specifically talk with them about school bullying and actually how to deal with this issue of LGBTQ engagement. In particular, we did it at Rayan Center in Plymouth at the end of last school year, or like the second half of last school year. So if there's any issues about your children or youth group and you want us to give an individual discussion just on this, to go to your youth group or to come to your masjid, we're also able to do this. And throughout the year, we have varying trainings where we go into masajid to talk about knowing your rights as students. We know everyone doesn't watch these videos, so we'll do this again probably in your masjid or at like a community dinner, like on a Saturday evening. We can do this again for your masjid, or we always do know your rights with law enforcement as well, Sister Amy. We do know your rights at the polls. We know that November elections are coming up, so we have a number of presentations as far as letting you be aware of your constitutional rights as American citizens, legal permanent residents, in which we can assist you with. Any closing statements, Sister Amy or Sister Nour?
The only closing statement I want to leave everybody with is that children's age does not dictate the amount of rights that they have. Children have all of the rights that adults have, and they have the right to actively enforce those rights, even in a public school setting, and that we should be advocating for our children as well to make sure that they are as comfortable as they should be in school so that they can get the best experience and the best out of their educational experience. And if you have issues or you have concerns about comments that are being made, even as young as second grade classrooms, we've heard comments that are being made about Muslims or about our beliefs or books that your children are being introduced to. We encourage you to contact our office and to take a consultation to see if there's any advocacy work that CAIR could do to make things a little bit, safer in the classroom for your students.
Yes, and to add on to that, as my role being director of Safe Spaces, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is nsali@cair.com. I don't know if it's already been posted on the website, but that is my email. So please feel free to reach out and let me know of anything going on in any of the schools.
Thank you very much, ladies. And with that, we will close and we ask Almighty Allah, Almighty God, to protect each and every one of you and your loved ones, those of you who are watching, to grant any healing to those of you who are sick. We also like to give special condolences to the family of Victor Ghalib Beg, who lost his wife, Shahina Auntie, yesterday, who passed away. Wonderful woman of character, one of the co-founders of Muslim Unity Center. She's the mother of Sophia Beg and mother-in-law of Brother Farhan Latif Khibri Foundation. Big loss for the community, and we ask Almighty God to forgive her of all of her sins. We ask Almighty God to have mercy on her soul. We ask Almighty God to give her the shafa'ah, the intercession of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow her to drink from his blessed hand sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the Hawd. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant her gentle firdaus al-a'la. We ask Almighty Allah to shower his patience, his divine love and patience upon the Beg family, on Sami and Sophia and Yusuf, her three children, her husband Ghalib, and all of their kinfolk who are grieving in this tremendous loss. The janazah prayer will be at Muslim Unity Center. The khutbah starts at 1:30, so after Salat al-Jum'ah, then there will be the Salat al-Jum'ah on Friday, of those of you who are able to make it. And if you're not able to make it, then at least try to make a dua for her, read Surah Yasin and offer it as a gift to her soul if you're not able to make Salat al-Jum'ah. That's my suggestion. And with that, we close. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asri innal insana lafi khusr. إلى الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وسلم والحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.